Hi everyone! So this is part 2 of your drawing challenge. So now that you have drawn your city, whatever your city may be, we are now going to use this water brush. This is a great tool for using watercolor because what you're going to need to do is twist your brush, fill it up with water, and then inside it works just like a pen would with ink. So twist, if you can't get it undone, try the other way because it does actually go the other way. And then if you squeeze here, the water will come out. As you can see here, the water's coming out. So what we're going to do here, and it just means that it's really easy and fabulous to take when you are around and about and thinking about how you can do some urban sketching. So hopefully you should have some watercolours. It might be slightly different to this, but either way, watercolours are working in the same way. So we've used our fine liners. And instead of using our normal paintbrushes, we're going to use this. It does mean that you are going to need some kind of tissue so that you can wipe away. Now, the thing is with watercolour, it's all about layering up colour and thinking about different layers and tones of one colour. So there's a technique that you can use, which is to wet the paper first. Now, I know here that this building is blue. So I'm actually going to wet the paper first, and we've used these lovely fine liners because they are waterproof. There is some smudging, as you can see, but mostly it's fine. So use the water you can wet the paper first and then add colour into it. Now I have got a bucket of water just in case. So you can have that on the side, but the idea of this is that you can use it wherever you go. So I'm going to choose this blue. Now, you've got your blue on, and if I just pop it onto the water, you can see closely that it soaks in directly into the water and into the page. It bleeds, what we call bleeding, and that's because it goes into the fibres of the paper. Normally we would use watercolour paper because that has different fibres and that really soaks up the colour and water really nicely. Now, if you need to mix colour, what you can do is, and what I do often, is to use the lid of your tray. And of course you can squeeze to make it more watery. And I think this blue house is actually, so squeeze out the water and wash your brush. It's actually a little bit more blue. Well, now I've changed it to green, so I'm going to need to wash my brush. So squeeze the water from your pen to wash it away. Okay, it will dye the end of your brush, don't worry about that. That's just stainage that you can dry off later. So first of all, you're just going to put a really simple wash. A wash meaning a very, very thin layer of paint. Very thin layer of paint, and these pens are really great to control. You can do it quite fast here, and then we've got some of this here. Now this isn't, of course, this isn't finished. We're going to need to come back to that when it's dry, and if you're in a hurry, then that's really no good with watercolors. You're going to need to come back to it. It really is an art of just being patient with this here. Now parts of these here with the balcony are white, so I'm going to leave those, and the doors are actually brown. Make sure you're referring back to your image. So now I'm just putting out the water onto my paper and giving it some colour here. Now there is another technique that I'm going to show you how to use, which does involve just a dry brush, which means you're not going to put water onto the paper first. You're simply going to just use the paint straight onto the paper. There's all sorts of different watercolour techniques that you can do. We're just going to use these for today. And of course, if you go over something when you're not quite right, the wonderful thing about watercolour is that you can just go over it a little later. It's got this lovely texture and technique here where the paint starts to dry and leaves darker and lighter bits. Very different to using acrylic paint. So we've got that to start with. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to wet my brush, dry it out, and then start to think about these other colours. Now, I'm going straight in here and wetting the paint in my palette. You can make it thinner depending on if you want it to be a stronger colour. Just put the paint on and then squeeze the brush as you go. But I'm now putting it on dry, and you can see here the different texture that's given. You need to be much more in control. If you don't want that, then just squeeze the brush and the paint will go further. You can control the amount of water that comes out just by squeezing here. Now, after I've put this grey on, I'm going to actually put lots of water in at the top and then put in some blue for the reflection. So I'm going to add in, I'm so used to going to that bucket, you might struggle with that too. So now I'm just going to add in these really soft tones for the grey. Squeezing as I go. Now that's become a really light wash there. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a little bit of blue, just making that wet. You don't want your paint to be dry. I'm going to use a lot of water here. Dab it off if you need to. And just add some blues into here. Now, one thing you do need to be careful with this paper is that the paper, if it starts to feel bobbled or a little bit lumpy, that's because you're working too hard in the same place when the paper is too wet. So just be mindful of that. Let it dry and come back to it. Don't be too impatient, because this is all about layering it up. Also, don't forget to look at your images as well. So I'm going to refer back to my images of Chelan Nunnery, which is our beautiful nunnery in Hong Kong. So don't forget to always check back and have a look. So also we've got the ICC here. And now, because the sunset, I want to get that lovely, make sure your brush is really, you can give it a good wash if you need to. But I'm going to get in these lovely, squeeze the brush. I'm going to mix some yellows in to maybe get in some sunset tones on our ICC here. Getting those nice yellows, just to add some different colour and some depth. Did you see? I then went to go for the bucket. I think I'm going to take that away because I'm too used to going into a bucket. We're really trying to use our brush here. And then adding in the water. And then I'm going to try and blend in some grey blue, so more water. Going to add in some greys on this side. Again, we're doing this on wet. Just work that in. And of course, this isn't finished. We're definitely going to return to this. This is just your base layer. If you wanted to, also, you can include nature. Now, I definitely walk a lot in Hong Kong, and there's some beautiful plants and flowers that we get in Hong Kong. So maybe I might put a tree in here if I wanted to, because our city wouldn't be complete without our peak. So I might even add our peak into it as well. So now I'm just going to add again in some blues, making sure my brush is really wet, and just work in some of those colours. When it's wet, they really blend. So what I'm going to do now, like magic, I'm going to speed up and show you what it looks like at the end.